So welcome everybody to the first Science Communication Lunch and Learn of the fall semester. My name is Jory Weintraub and I'm the Science Communication Director with the Duke Initiative for Science and Society, which is based at Duke University in North Carolina. You may be wondering why we call this online session a lunch and learn, which is a very reasonable question actually. I've actually been running this series for several years now, and for the first many years that we ran it, it was always a cozy little in-person event here on campus at Duke. And we would do it at high noon and we would provide pizza for everybody. Obviously, with the COVID-19 pandemic in place, we had to change our strategy for delivering these sessions, but we didn't want to stop running the series entirely. So today, for the first time ever, we're doing it online. We're so pleased that everyone can join us. I wasn't actually creative enough to come up with a new name for the series, so we're just sticking with Lunch and Learn. So I do apologize about the lack of pizza, but I tell you what, I invite everybody out there to come visit us in Durham when the pandemic is over, and I'll buy you all a slice. How's that sound? The silver lining, of course, though, to this forced pivot to an online format is that we can now have people join us from all over the world. And so we're delighted to have a lot more people joining us than we would normally have face-to-face. For those of you who are new to this monthly series, the idea behind it is to bring, together people who have interesting aspects of science communication that they work on in their career to bring some unique aspect of science communication to the public. So we try to have a really wide range of topics, anything sort of under the large umbrella of science communication I consider to be fair game for this series. So in the past, we've covered things ranging from, communicating about science in the courtroom, to bringing art into science communication, to communicating science to incarcerated individuals in prisons. So pretty wide range of topics. I'm always interested in hearing suggestions for new topics. So if you have an idea for an interesting topic in science communication, something you work on or something that other people work on that you think is really interesting, please feel free to reach out to me by email, and we'd love to get suggestions. And please definitely check out our website. I think my colleague Sarah is going to put this in chat. But check out the website where we talk about all of our past sessions, and you can read about the upcoming sessions. Okay, so today's session is entitled Inclusive Communication in the Science Classroom, and I'm delighted to have two wonderful presenters for today's session, Dr. Kelly Hogan and Dr. Viji Sathy of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which just happens to be my alma mater. So I feel compelled to say go Tar Heels to any other Tar Heels that are out there. Okay, so doctors Hogan and Sathy have been collaborating in this area of inclusive science communication in the science classroom for many years, and have published a lot in this area, including a very widely read and cited article in the Chronicle of Higher Education, which was last year. I think we're going to put a link to that in the chat as well, so you can check that article out. This is a topic that I've really wanted to cover since I started the series several years ago, and I knew that Doctors Hogan and Sathy would be the perfect people to cover it. So I'm so pleased that we were finally able to get them on the schedule and have them joining us. So let me just quickly introduce them and I'll hand it off to them. Dr. Kelly Hogan is a STEM teaching professor in biology and Associate Dean of Instructional Innovation at UNC-Chapel Hill. She received her PhD in pathology and laboratory medicine from UNC. Dr. Viji Sathy is a professor of the practice of psychology and neuroscience at UNC-Chapel Hill and received her PhD in psychometrics from UNC. So all three of us are, I venture to say, proud Carolina grads. The presentation, they're gonna present on some of their work, and then we will open it up to Q&A. So again, please feel free to put all your questions in the chat the chat room, and we will try to get to as many questions as we can. And with that, I just want to thank our presenters and hand it off to them. So Drs. Hogan and Sathy, thank you for joining us today, and please take it away.
Thank you for the invite.
Thank you.
Glad to see the turnout today.
Yeah, great. So we often like to start what are becoming pretty regular Zoom sessions with some kind of opening activity. This is one that we've been doing with students and others. If you feel so inclined, if you'd like to share your quarantine name with us, you can get started that way. Your quarantine name is your current mood plus the last item you ate from the cupboard pantry. And this is mine, motivated chocolate covered espresso bean. Putting ideas in my head for what I want to eat later.
We've got some interesting dietary patterns I'm seeing here on viewers today.
But how are our moods?
Chocolate is well represented.
Apocalyptic, okay. Got it.
Okay. So one thing we would like to know as we get started is who you are. And so if you'll take a moment to go to polev.com/Carolina, and Viji's going to type the link into the chat as well. And just let us know which category you best fit in. Great, so a nice array of people at different stages, different ranks, different careers. We'll keep that in mind, and now everybody can keep that in mind as we continue our conversation.
So before we dig into some of the communication aspects, we thought it would be helpful to just lay out some of the tenets that we think about when we think about inclusive teaching, because I know some of you may be familiar with this and some of you may not be familiar. So we wanted to just share some about the principles that we operate on under inclusive teaching. And the first principle is that inclusive teaching is a mindset. And what we're thinking about when we're teaching inclusively is for every decision we make related to teaching, who is being left out as a result of that approach. So for example, if I pose a question to a group of students, either online or in person, who is going to feel comfortable answering that question? Who volunteers? Most students may not feel very comfortable depending on, for example, the class size. If it's large and we're in person, 200 people, that may not be a comfortable space for people to engage. But as you can see online and through chat, that might feel like a pretty comfortable place to exchange ideas. So just thinking through the mechanics of how we teach and who feels comfortable participating and when we pose questions.
And principle number 2 is the more structure, the better for all students. So when we're thinking about teaching, it may be that we're taking some time to lecture or explain, and it might be face-to-face, or it could even be a video online. And we have to recognize that some students have the know-how to take notes in real time, and some can just do this better in real time than others. And one thing that we can do is to provide more structure to kind of level the playing field for all students. So we could give skeleton outlines that help give an expert view of the lecture without handing over everything, and at the same time teaching students how to take notes better as well. And for the students that don't need it, it certainly doesn't harm them, but for the students that do need it, it can really give them a leg up and help them.
And then the third principle, that too little structure leaves too many students behind. So a common example we see in the classroom is turn to your neighbor and explain, for example, your answer, or just something related to a prompt, right? But if students don't feel like they're part of a group, if they're not feeling comfortable with the people around them, then they may not enjoy those opportunities where we could engage in the classroom. So another approach might be to think about assigning groups or structuring the groups in such a way so that no one is left behind or left out of a conversation. And that with that structure, that assignment, then everybody is, at least you can be assured everybody has someone to talk to, and it helps promote that sense of belonging in the classroom. So all of these principles that we're talking about really do convey the ideas of belonging and thriving and growth mindset that empower our students to counteract messages that some of our students receive implicitly or explicitly. And so this is the way we're going to approach our conversation today. And we do want it to be a conversation about the ways in which we can do this with our students, both implicitly and explicitly conveying belonging, thriving, and growth mindset.
So in the spirit of a conversation and thinking about this idea of belonging, we'd love for you to choose one of these prompts per response, and you can answer multiple times. But either answer, I felt like I belonged in a classroom when, or in a different response, I felt like I didn't belong in a classroom when. These are great. We're already seeing some really tangible examples and things that a lot of people can do pretty easily with introducing with pronouns, thinking about diverse role models in the curriculum. And some pretty hurtful ways to feel excluded and not belong in a classroom. So this approach to asking a question is a little bit different than using the chat because we can be a little more honest because we can be anonymous in this way. And so this is the kind of question that people might not feel comfortable putting their name associated with, but you can see the diversity of ideas that are coming out here. And we want to keep some of these ideas in mind as we continue our conversation, because this feeling of belonging is really important in the classroom.
Yeah, it's always, sometimes it's tough to read the ones where you don't belong because you can really feel it. These are the kinds of experiences we don't want our students to have. And so it's helpful to think about how to be more conscious in our approaches in the classroom to not allow these kinds of things to occur. So we're going to just think about this, this as a framework of the different ways communication could occur in a classroom setting. The first is the instructor-peer communication that might happen. The second is peer-to-peer conversations or communications. And then the third is the classroom community to the public. I know this is a science communication group, so you would appreciate, I think, the idea that some classes, and Kelly and mine included, do have ways to engage with the public with our work in the classroom. So that's the way we're going to frame some of the examples we provide to you here. And hopefully we'll brainstorm some more ideas as we chat. So the first one was the instructor to student communications. In an inclusive classroom, we can convey that students belong and that we want them to thrive by being transparent in how we structure the course, facilitate it, and simply state it often, right? So we want students to feel like they have it in their wherewithal to succeed. So sometimes it takes building a course to make sure that they ensure that success. As much as possible, providing the resources and scaffolding, but it's also just telling them that we believe that you can do well in this course. So we can say that explicitly in a syllabus, for example. We'll show you examples of that. We could do that in our assignments and the types of assignments we create to allow them to identify, but also approach the ways in which we think about our discipline authentically, the activities we have in class, and again, some of the more concrete communications we have through emails and announcements we might share with them. So here's an example. This is just as we're starting out thinking about the first point of contact. And we're thinking about it in the academic space because we were talking about inclusive classrooms. But in any sphere that you're working in, I want you to think about this as the onboarding experience. What does it look like when someone becomes part of your team? And how are you explicitly or implicitly welcoming that person into your team? So here's some examples of what you might see on my syllabus. I'm telling them that this course is not just about the instructors. We often see the syllabus has the instructor name top and front, but I have a section where it's here's your instructional support group, and your peers are part of your instructional support group. So saying that this is an important aspect of the communication or community is to have your peers here for you to help you and to use that resource in the classroom spaces, whether online or in person. And then just to explicitly say things about respect. And you'll see in my syllabus, there's these little icons along the left. There are various trainings that our campus offers for faculty and staff on our campus, and the LGBTQI Center has a safe zone training. There's first aid, mental health and first aid training. Our veterans group has a training. So anytime I go through any of those trainings, we get, this is when we're actually in person, we have these little placards we have on our doors, but we have an image of these that we also include in our syllabus. So our students understand that we've undergone some training to help with certain populations in our course, and then also just the idea that that they deserve to be in the classroom. So just a short statement around their work thus far that brought them to the space, and that how I believe in them, and that we should be celebrating their accomplishments together in the classroom.
Here are two parts of my syllabus I thought I would share. So the first part, along the top right, is a diversity statement from the biology department. And if you wanted to add something like that, if you don't have already, Duke may have something that has been crafted, or you can certainly search on Google for ideas of how to craft a statement like that. With the big bold words, student care, I was co-teaching this class, and so we wanted to make it very clear that we were always available and that we were here to help take care of them in a variety of ways. And then the bottom part is more about student thriving and how do successful students seek out extra practice and help. And so lots of ways that students can do this. And sometimes I think we overlook this on a syllabus, that students are really looking for how can they be successful, and we can point that out pretty quickly in ways that they can thrive in our class. So how else do you convey belonging, thriving, and growth mindset to students early in your interaction with them? So once again, please, let's keep this as a conversation as we're going. And so if you've got some good ideas to share, I can't promise that we can moderate the whole time, but we'll be looking as we're going to. But some ways that you convey belonging, thriving, and growth mindset early in a semester or whatever interactions you have with students.
And this is when you can use the chat window to provide your answers.
Great, and we're seeing that you've taken some ideas from us, and we love that. We think education is all about sharing and stealing and crediting what you've stolen. So definitely recycle. Sharing mistakes, growth mindset, those are all great ideas.
I was just going to add, I think we're going to do our best to make sure that we capture the comments in chat, and we'll find a way to make that accessible to people afterwards, so that we don't lose all of these great comments that we're getting from everybody.
Yeah, they are really great. And some of them we are going to definitely talk on, give you a few more ideas around what you're saying too. So of course, it's not just when we meet our students that we want to be thinking about inclusion and how they feel that they belong and thrive. So a couple more ideas, certainly not exhaustive, but a list along belonging. I often just use the simple phrase, "you belong here," and I find it's really helpful after, say, the first exam. I teach a lot of first-year students in their first science class ever. And we all know that if they fail the first exam, they immediately think, that's it, I'm no good at this, I'm not going to stay in science, forget, I'm not going to be a doctor anymore. And we don't want to lose students after that. And so we don't want them to feel like they can't do this and they don't belong. And by saying those simple words, it certainly won't harm the students that don't doubt they belong to be there, but it can be really powerful for the students that really need to hear that at that moment. The other thing you can do is share about any of your own feelings you've ever had that made you feel like an imposter, a fraud, that you didn't belong. And I bet everybody has some moment. For me, grad school was a slap in the face, and I thought, oh, I really don't belong here. Everybody is smarter than me. But whether it's, you know, getting to your first class as an undergrad, grad school, your first job, I think a lot of people have those feelings, and sharing that just makes you seem more human and helps build that feeling for our students that don't know that other people are experiencing this feeling regularly too. Along thriving, what are the ways our students can be successful? And we could go on and on about this, but we thought we'd stick to some ways around communicating. So when we communicate, we want to make sure we have visual cues as well as oral cues. So you can see we've got live captioning going here, but even within our lectures, whenever we have instructions, we make sure that our slides are really visually supporting what we're saying. And so that might mean using 30 slides as opposed to 10 for a 10-minute talk, just to make sure that we've got everything visually available as well. And we know that that helps our multilingual learners, our students with learning differences, with hearing impairments, and so on. Silence is another thing that we find to be a really powerful tool in communication in the classroom and helps many of our students thrive. So it may be that you say something like, you'll have 2 minutes to think quietly, and then I'll continue, or then we'll pair up and share ideas. And we know that certain students really need that time to construct their ideas and can't jump into a conversation. And typically we might group those students into introverts, but lots of students, for a variety of reasons, need that time to think and process. Multiple modes of participation. Why? Because we're a diverse group of people. We're human, and some of us prefer to write our answers. Some of us prefer to talk out loud. Some would prefer small groups, anonymous, non-anonymous. So lots of varied modes of participation help all students thrive. And then bi-weekly announcements. This has become really clear with a lot of online teaching that our students are getting lost in the shuffle of what do I need to do and how do I survive being a student in a pandemic. And so regular announcements, not just anytime you think of them, but regular bi-weekly announcements that are both informational and motivating, and maybe just fun with some self-disclosure in there about how you're thriving, and model that for them as well.
And then related to the growth mindset, we often talk about, especially in science, the necessity of failure in order to get to a final point, right? That we're iterating all the time, but we don't always build that into the ways in which we evaluate our students. Every assignment counts, for example, and you can't have it be late by any bit, right? So thinking about the flexibility in the grading schema to convey the mindset we have in science that that yes, you might not do great on exam 1, but that's okay because I'll drop the lowest exam grade, for example, or we can replace it with a cumulative final course grade or exam grade. And these are just examples of ways we can start to embody the principles we have for learning and for STEM in the actual structure of our courses. And it helps convey to students who may not have an early success that it is possible to do well. It's still possible to continue to have hope to do better and have a growth mindset that eventually they will understand the material. And then thinking about disclosing your own experiences with mistakes and learning are really important too. I think oftentimes our students see us as experts, and that sort of spans a wide variety of topics that we certainly aren't experts in, but that we're essentially perfect. And that's far from true, right? And that we make mistakes in our own environments and our learning, and that sharing that with them. What are we learning about right now? What are we struggling with to learn? Or even the first time you learned that particular topic, that normalizes this, this aspect of it's okay to not get it the first time because it's hard. So we wanted to bring the student voice into this because we're two faculty members talking about this, and this felt like a way we could share a little bit with you how this is received on the student side of things. These are some quotes that we'll sprinkle in throughout that are just comments that Kelly and I have received over the years that get to some of these ideas. And this first one is, "I really appreciate having a professor that cares and believes in their students." And the second, "Thank you for emailing me and praising me. The last email you sent me really made me study harder on this test because your email was so encouraging." So these are ways in which the instructor can communicate with students that they care about them, that they belong in the course. You know, sending an email after an exam, for example, to check in on a student. These are all ways in which we can really convey the belonging aspect of this, and students feel it and they receive it, and sometimes they actually acknowledge it in these ways.
Okay, let's move on to brainstorming some ideas around peer-to-peer communication in the classroom. So in an inclusive classroom, we can provide structure for peer-to-peer interactions so we don't leave it to chance that students know how to engage and work effectively together. So first and foremost, we teach whatever our discipline is, but there's no reason we can't start with also teaching about effective collaboration. And if this is a skill we really value and we know the outside world beyond our classroom values it, why not teach them a little bit about effective collaboration? Other ways to structure this are assigning reporters and roles, and also group contracts. So we'll give you some examples here. This is an example of students in my class that happens to be online, but I would normally give instructions like this face-to-face as well. And so you can see that they have been given very clear directions. And what I wanted to point out is that I've assigned them roles. So the person with the least number of vowels in their full legal name will be the scribe. Then it tells them what the scribe should do. The person with the most vowels will be the reporter, and it tells them what the reporter shall do. And then whoever is left, because I wasn't sure of the size of those groups, would be the facilitator, and here's what the facilitator does. And then I give the facilitator a role. Start everyone off with 5 minutes of silent time, making sure that people don't rush right in, you know, and just saying exactly what I would want to say, and not being afraid to say this on every assignment or breakout room activity that they're going to do, reminding them the best practices around how we're going to do group work.
This is an example of a group contract. I taught a first-year seminar in the spring, and one of the things I wanted them to do was to think about when group work has failed for them. And we started with that brainstorm, and everybody has examples of things that don't work well in group work, the kinds of activities. And we didn't have to name names or courses or any of those things, just common things that arise when working with a group. And then we took that list and we thought about how we could mitigate those circumstances before we began our group work in the class. And so then I asked students to take their list and their solutions to those problems and then to organize them. And because it was a course where I was really working on communication, it's a first-year seminar about talking about numbers, I wanted them to think about visually communicating it in a contract that was an infographic style. So I was trying to do this twofold of not only thinking about how to work well in a group, but also to put it in a format that would allow them to learn a little bit more about design and elements of design. So this is an example of that kind of group collaboration, but sort of engaging them in the process of thinking about how do we proactively mitigate some of the issues that might arise with group work and support each other. And I find that this is a really helpful way, because we start with a conversation with giving people the benefit of the doubt if they can't make a meeting, for example, or trying to set meeting times that are inclusive. So there are lots of really good ways in which students will generate all great ideas about how to do this, and you can just frame it, and it's helpful to communicate to the students how important this culture is for you, and that you're being inclusive in all aspects, including fostering their own inclusion in the group.
And so the student voice, when we are really intentional about collaboration, here are 2 student quotes. "By doing the group work that you constantly encouraged, I have doubted myself time and time again, changed my answer because of what someone else said, then suffered regret after realizing that my original answer was correct. Eventually, I started to say F it and started to speak up and believe in myself. Second student, thank you for teaching me that learning is so much more than the material. It is the experience of connecting with others in the process. And we have lots of examples of how students initially are a little wary of group work and then by the end realize what an important aspect of the classroom it has become.
And then the third of communication is the class to the public. I know that this may not be an element that's in every course, but we wanted to give you a couple of examples of how that's happened in our courses. Teaching inclusively means recognizing that students are motivated in different ways to engage in research and science communication. Learning about your students and structuring multiple opportunities to see themselves as scientists are important. This one is near and dear to me because I feel like it was very helpful to me as somebody who grew up in a small town, who didn't really think a lot about what the options were to be a scientist. I mean, I thought being a doctor was the only option available to me in terms of being a scientist, because it was the only person I'd really interacted with who was using science. So for some of our students, we needed opportunities to really allow them to think broadly about scientists. It's not just being a professor, for example. So one of the projects I had my students work on in a course that was mostly for seniors was contributing to this this set of posts, Scientists of North Carolina. Some of you may be familiar with this if you live in North Carolina. It's great. Basically social media site modeled a bit after Humans of New York, but allows the community to see who our scientists are, who are our local scientists. And I partnered with this site, and we actually worked towards getting students to interview a scientist and then post that information. And I really pushed them in this course to think about the non-traditional scientists, somebody who, and you know, like close your eyes, imagine the stereotypical scientist. Now I want you to really think about people who you don't typically think of as scientists, but are using scientific thinking. And I had such great responses from students, ranging from one friend who interviewed a friend who was a bartender and talked about the approaches they used in mixing drinks, for example. And another who interviewed a younger sibling who loved dinosaurs and just felt like, you know, there was so much science curiosity there that they wanted to interview them in that post. So these are ways, again, to think about engaging our students in different ways, to think about who's a scientist and what that means. So some quotes from students here: from proposing questions to data analysis to Tableau to website design and science communication and all the pieces in between. Thank you for giving me the confidence to further explore and present research. This is a student who had a chance to present some of their work in a poster session on our campus. So giving them opportunities to do the authentic work we would do as scientists helps them see themselves as a scientist. Thankfully, throughout the course, I learned that science is not just about chemical reactions and nucleic acids, but rather it's an approach to knowledge applicable both in and outside of the classrooms. I mean, this is the dream, right? That the students aren't just seeing the content in our course, but they're making connections to what's happening in our courses and the world around them, and that they're transferring that information. So hopefully we've given you some thoughts about how to do that in a concrete way, but we'll open the conversation up in a bit soon to learn more.
And then I'll just chime in also with some examples from my class in terms of the class to the public. So I assigned some reading assignments around diversity and inclusion within science. I required them to put some discussion board posts. Everybody had to post at least one thing and reply at least 2 times, so structured discussion board posts. Here are some of the things that students said. Through explaining their choices as a good fit or clicking well at this institution or workplace, they are trying to justify keeping professional positions open to a small, elite, white male group. So they're having difficult discussions and saying some really meaningful things. I found both of these readings to be particularly interesting. While I had no idea that the number of women who have won Nobel Prizes was so low, I was not entirely surprised. While it seems like the number of women in STEM is growing, at least when I look at my peers, it seems that there are many fewer women as heads of research labs or in certain teaching positions. And our students maybe recognize this, but to really draw it out in assignments where they're really faced with the data that we have in science about some of the lack of diversity. So these assignments were really based on who belongs in science, how is science biased, and it led us to a class-based action to produce curricular materials. Now, I kind of had this designed in my head before the class started, but by doing it this way, I really got them on board, and they now know that they are taking action and doing something about it. And we're working with a group called Project Biodiversify, and it's a repository of just a set of 3 slides about each scientist, and they're really trying to highlight a variety of scientists and really a broad category of what diversity in science means. And I see my students already trying to find role models that look like them, and they're linking it to content for our course. So it's wrapping up in a lot of really unique ways that the students are working with this. And this will be public facing because these slides will go into the repository. So when we think about science in particular, we do have a diversity problem, and there are a lot of different data sets that tell us this. Here's one set that says different students switch out of STEM majors before earning a degree in science. And so we know that the rate of students that enter into STEM when they first come into college is pretty similar across race and ethnic groups. But 29% of white students leave, whereas 37% of Latinx students leave, up to 40% of Black students leave based on this study. So there are some differences in terms of who's leaving. And we can see how this quickly leads to a problem of lack of diversity. But if we intentionally communicate belonging and how to thrive in a classroom, it's one way we can help overcome some of the problems that students feel that they're being excluded either implicitly or explicitly. And here's a last student quote for you. My first 3 semesters here at Carolina have been challenged by personal and medical circumstances, which have certainly taken a toll on my academic standing. And quite honestly, my performance in this course was, I decided, going to be the final call as to whether or not I would continue with my degree in biology at UNC-Chapel Hill. Despite my rough start, it is comforting to have finally found solid ground upon which I can work to become the caliber of biologist I have always wanted to be. Thank you again, Dr. Hogan, for constantly reminding me of what exactly it means to call yourself a scientist. And if we really want to keep students in science or whatever discipline we're talking about, it can really start with one instructor in one classroom helping a student achieve their dreams and not drop out. So that kind of clarifies how we wanted to frame the rest of our conversation, and we have really enjoyed seeing the conversation that's ongoing in the chat already. Jory, we'll leave this up here. It's an upvote type question, so if people have questions or comments, they can put them into poll everywhere. It's also upvote in the sense that if someone says something that you really like and want to discuss, we'll see what rises to the top, and we'll try and focus on those in addition to the questions, Jory, that you had already pre-planned.
Great. Well, so I do have some questions that were submitted when people signed up, and I've been trying to take some notes on questions that have been in there, put in the chat. Should we just go ahead and open it up, and I'll start sharing some of those questions with you now and let you respond? Okay. So I'm going to exercise moderator privilege here and ask my own question first, which is, and then I promise I'll get to our participants' questions. But I'm wondering if you could just comment in general on how this forced shift to online education has affected the ability or the, I guess, the efficacy of people practicing inclusive science communication. Has it generally been harder, you think, for people to adhere to these principles with the online shift, or in some ways has it been facilitated and made easier? Or is it the case that the fundamental principles are the same regardless of whether you're online or in person? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'll get started. I think in a lot of ways, the time that we're in, so the pandemic plus the explosion of Black Lives Matter in a more meaningful way, a more recognized way this time around, I think has led a lot more people to be aware of differences and inequities. And I think they're really more focused on communicating in a way that can help that. And it doesn't mean everyone knows how to do it. Certainly lots of us are learning a lot about the pandemic as we go. But my own example is that, I talked about biweekly messages with teaching online. And I think I will take some of those lessons back to my face-to-face classroom, because there's no reason I shouldn't structure my announcements as a weekly announcement or a biweekly announcement, because if it helps students now, it will help them all the time. It's something that's forefront in my mind right now, that they're getting lost in the shuffle of lots of online classes at the same time. And we're all doing things differently. So that would be my example, is to say that I think there are certain reasons you have to structure it even more online. And then I think we'll be able to take some of that back.
And Viji, did you have anything to add to that?
Sure. And Kelly, I think the poll didn't actually load, even though it's showing on the screen. And normally when we show it on the screen, it automatically pushes out. So if you want to try pushing it out again and seeing if that helps.
Go ahead.
I think the main thing I would say is that I find this to be an exciting time to be engaging with faculty, because some of the things we've been working so hard to communicate about the lack of equity in the classroom, and also just the diverse experiences our students bring. I think that's so much at the fore right now. It's really obvious when a student doesn't have a reliable internet connection, for example. So the kinds of things that I think got masked when we were in a classroom are becoming more, they're more visible in some ways in this environment, and people are wrestling with the idea that there are differences, there are different kinds of responsibilities students are being asked to do at this time. So I see an opportunity here for people to make the connection when we eventually move back into a classroom, that our students aren't all the same, and they do need different kinds of ways to engage with your course materials, with the course, and just in life in general, to allow for that flexibility. And hopefully some of the things that we're doing in our courses, as Kelly mentioned, that they'll stick, because they're good improvements and they should be adapted into the in-person version.
Great, thank you for those comments. And I see we're starting to get questions now, but something you just said, Viji, actually is a good segue into one of the questions that was submitted earlier when people registered. So I want to ask that right now. You mentioned sort of engaging with other faculty and engaging with your colleagues. Someone asked the question, how do you explain to colleagues that certain practices are not inclusive, and why they should work to be more inclusive in their teaching? So I guess to paraphrase, what do you say to the colleagues who haven't bought into this idea yet? Do you have tips or strategies for how to have those conversations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think understanding motivation and change is difficult. It's like it's a human condition, right? To figure out how to change people's minds about something and approach. And if we put on our scientist hat, we know that sometimes data is a convincing tool. So thinking about evaluating the data in your course or in STEM might be a way to nudge people to think about the approaches they use. But I personally, you'll see we used a variety of techniques here. The student voice is another element. Another one that we didn't mention that I think is helpful to me, at least, is when I talk about faculty development, when I talk to faculty about the kinds of changes I made in my course, I'm talking about how much more fun and engaging teaching has become for me. So I'm really focusing on the benefits to me too. And so I think there's a wide variety of ways we can tap into people's motivation to make changes. And I think equity is one of them. I think that's another one where people are saying, I want to do better, I want to learn more. And so we can also push in that direction as well.
Yeah, and I work a lot in terms of institutional change and helping faculty improve. So I'll just add, most faculty will, when asked how they made a change in their class, it's usually because a colleague has talked to them and suggested something. So we know faculty to faculty interactions are really important. One way that I've done that in my own teaching is to invite somebody into my own classroom to just say, would you give me some feedback on what I'm doing? And really, it might have been a way to say, come see some of the different ways that I'm interacting with students. And often that person will say, you know, I never saw so many students engaged, or I never saw polls in action, or whatever that is. And another way that I've seen a lot of meaningful change on our campus and others is with co-teaching, which has its barriers institutionally, but when you co-teach with somebody, you get an opportunity to share some of the methods and the policies around teaching, and that just forces conversations and change in itself. So those are two other ways I would suggest.
Yeah, and I would imagine, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine that you don't typically encounter a lot of faculty, fellow, colleagues and fellow faculty that are philosophically opposed to what you're talking about, as much as maybe just they're resistant because it seems overwhelming to try to incorporate new strategies into their teaching. So I would imagine part of the conversation is just, here are the benefits that you gain, relative to the amount of input you have to provide to change those teaching strategies. And I noticed as I was asking that question and you were responding to it, there was essentially the same question was posted and got the most upvote so far. So I think that was a question a lot of people had.
I'll say there's one more thing, Jory, and that is that you're exactly right. People feel that there is a big lift here, but we are also careful to say there are small tweaks that you can make that also accomplish this. Like, for example, after posing a question, just stop talking. And let people think for a minute, right? And that's a simple thing people can do, is just have a little bit more silence in their classroom. So I think there are multiple ways in which we can encourage and foster this, but those small wins are some of the ways in which you can get people at least in the door thinking about it.
Yeah, I imagine that reflexively a lot of faculty's biggest fear is silence in the classroom, right? So they want to fill that silence as quickly as they can. It looked like the second most upvotes go to the question about talking about religion and spirituality as an element of cultural identity and STEM inclusion. Would you like to address that? Your thoughts on that?
Sure. So I teach introductory biology, and evolution is a big component of that course. So it does come up fairly explicitly when we talk about evolution, and what I try and do is obviously not isolate any one religion, and to really draw the difference between religion, spirituality, and science, and how science is about evidence and testing ideas, and religion is about faith, and that you can have both. And I try and give them role models of especially prominent scientists who have religion and faith, but are also scientists, and try and work that way to say to students, like, there's a lot of rhetoric out there in the world that makes you think it's an either or, and it's absolutely not an either or, and your faith is your faith.
Absolutely.
Jory, you may have ideas around this too.
I spent a lot of time talking to the public about evolution, yes. So actually one of the questions that was submitted in advance is relevant to this, and I think it's a really interesting question. So I'm gonna just follow up with this question, which is, I'm particularly interested in inclusive language for teaching the evolution of sexual reproduction and sexual selection, such that I am inclusive of non-binary human gender identities, as well as non-heterosexual sexual preferences. So obviously a touchy subject for a lot of people. Any strategies or suggestions for dealing with that particular challenge? Yeah,
that's a really interesting area that I'm seeing a lot more people sharing good ideas around. And a lot of people are thinking, well, maybe we should say individuals that produce gametes that are sperm, or, to use language where we get away from those kinds of suggestions that certain gender identities produce certain things. I know also with like pedigree analysis and genetics, that comes up a lot too. We have to be careful not to say mom and dad, or, to use language that feels more inclusive. And I don't know, honestly, sometimes I feel like I'm stepping on landmines at all times, and I have to really carefully think about what I'm saying. So it is a hard area, and it's the kind of language that seems to be changing rapidly. So it's the kind of place we definitely want to put our heads together as colleagues. But it's a great question, and a lot of people are struggling with that and trying to come up with what language could stick.
Viji, do you have anything to add to that, or do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna, yeah, I'll say briefly because I see another question here that I'd love to get into. But you know, I teach the statistics course, a methods course, so thinking about the way we frame questions on surveys, for example, you know, having students really wrestle with pushing each other to say, do we really want to stick to the binary? Is that, and if we go to 15 responses, how does that involve, like, what do we do with the analysis aspect of things? And so I think these are all really good and useful conversations to be having with our students, and pushing each other and recognizing that we're not going to get it right all the time, but we can model what it looks like to self-correct as we go through.
Yeah, and I feel like maybe a big part of this is recognizing both in ourselves and our colleagues and our students the need to give some grace, right? And respect the fact that I think most of us are doing our best to try to do the right thing. And Kelly, you said you feel like you potentially are stepping on landmines a lot. And so understanding that we mostly are all working with the best of intentions, I think, is probably really important.
That's right.
So Viji, you said there was a question
Yeah,
that you wanted to
this
respond to?
one that's at the top here about how do we work to have people that see STEM classrooms as neutral, that they're not. I think this is a great question to be asking ourselves as a community, because I think even faculty struggle with this idea that it's sort of value neutral, and it's not value neutral. It's never been value neutral. And if I think about my own discipline of statistics, if I think about even the origins of the techniques that we use and the people who generated those techniques, they are not race neutral. They, you know, a lot of this came out of the eugenics movement. And for me, this is an area where I feel I've been pushing myself more recently to say, how do I bring that into the conversation with my students? We used to talk about t-tests and regression and all of these things. I never really talked about, where did the Pearson correlation coefficient come from? Where did, you know, so how do we start to address not just where these things came from, but sometimes the very racist and sexist histories of our disciplines, not in a way to discredit the work or that we can't use these tools, but to give context for the tools and how they've arisen, and how we have opportunities now to think differently about things, and to find new problems and challenges based on the questions that motivate my students. So I think that's really important to address the idea that it is not and never been neutral. And I think it is a challenge. It's one that we really need to grapple with as a community.
Yeah, and I think our students are hungry for this. When you say, how do you work to have people see that STEM classrooms are not neutral? It's our colleagues that maybe don't see it that way sometimes, but it's also the students. But my own experience with students is, once I show them that it's not neutral, they're just hungry for more of it. And I think within our disciplines, the more we can share ideas, so building curricula around this, case studies, just showing the places that it's not neutral. I think we all just need help, because we're in this mindset that we're here to deliver content, it's textbook content. And often the traditional content we've been taught didn't include these things. So it's okay that we're all looking for this kind of content right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's always this sense that politics, for example, and science are supposed to be disconnected and distinct, and there's no place for politics in the discussion of science. But these are such unusual times that we're living in now, and I'm thinking just about last night, I saw an interview with Laura Helmuth, who's a great science writer and editor-in-chief of Scientific American. And Scientific American just decided for the first time in their 125-year history to endorse a political candidate. I won't mention which one. You can look it up. You could probably guess. But I just think it's a really unusual time and an unprecedented time in our history. So there's so many interesting elements of this that we need to factor into the discussion now about the role of science relative to society. Unfortunately, we are almost out of time. We have a couple minutes left. So what I'd like to do really quickly is ask if either of you have any sort of summarizing or concluding statements.
I would just like to say I really enjoyed this, and I'm going to go back and read all the comments in the chat, because I know I've missed a lot, and I know that you all shared some really great ideas. Thank you for engaging with us and with each other in that forum, as well as the ones that we could pay more attention to. So just gratitude. Thanks for coming today and sharing and being part of this conversation.
Yeah, I'll echo the same. Time is very precious, especially these days. So we appreciate everybody who made some time to join us today, and those of you who will be watching the recording a little bit later. Thanks for participating and engaging, and we'd love to stay connected. So I posted our links to Twitter in the chat window. So feel free to stay in touch. Let us know what you're trying, what's working for you, and let's just keep pushing and learning from each other.
And that's a great opportunity for me to thank all of our participants for joining us today, and especially to our two presenters, Dr. Kelly Hogan and Dr. Viji Sathy, for a wonderful conversation. And like you said, hopefully for many people, this is just the beginning of what will be a long, ongoing conversation. So thanks to our presenters, thanks to all our participants for joining us, and we hope to see some of you next month at the next SciComm Lunch-and-Learn. Have a good day, everyone. Stay well.